on days like today, we pivot to fundamentals.
Yes, just get back, heads down and building. I I never want to root for I never want to root for, you know, bear markets or anything, but sometimes it gets everything back focused on utility value and making sure we're actually solving real problems. So it's kind of what we've always been doing over here at Helium, and just kind of stay in the course.
Yep, absolutely. It doesn't really matter what the market is doing. People are always building, whether it's Nova Labs or the Helium Foundation or community members, or even people out there just deploying their hotspots. People are always very focused on this community and getting things done, and that's one of the things I really appreciate. It means that there's never a dull moment, right? The chatter never lulls.
No, it's always, I was gonna say, just like always a lot going on. I think one of the things, I mean, having worked across multiple crypto projects, I'm always just so impressed with our community. And that one, it's just the folks are incredibly technical. From really like the telecom and radio perspective. We don't always have this. I mean, I actually kind of love the fact that we're not as focused on memes all the time. We don't have the same kind of degen audience that some of the other networks do, but there's such this relentless focus on technical proficiency and efficiency, and thinking about the right way to deploy the conversations around antennas and gain and the right components. Folks are really devoted to this. I mean, when I think about the community-owned infrastructure, to have like this many people around the world so actively engaged and involved, and this is just to date, it's just really been one network focused on LoRaWAN and IoT. So the idea of opening this up and taking the same exciting community and looking at these new opportunities of where we can add utility and kind of bring new wireless networks into the fold, and other valuable services that benefit Web3 and other folks around connectivity. Like I mean, with we'll get into talk about boring and decentralized VPN, but so many of these things just unlock so much for Web3. All these different things. Whether you're talking about decentralized finance, you're talking about NFTs. It all comes back to making sure you have censorship resistant connectivity. The idea that you don't have single points of failure in wireless access around the world. That's really so much of what Helium enables, and what makes me excited to kind of get up and keep working every day. Just checking to see.
Yeah, likewise.
Who else we got? So I see Karam's joined up. Do we have Boris here? Just looking on the attendee list to make sure we've got all of our guests joining up. I see Boring's here.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through as well. But yeah, just to piggyback on what you were saying while you look through the list, I think all of the things you just mentioned are what keeps me constantly excited about Helium. And it's fun, I think, to think about it as an open source infrastructure project, because that's what it feels like to me, a lot more than a crypto quote unquote project. I mean, certainly we exist in the Web3 sphere, but I think the spirit of the builders in this community are much more akin to that of open source, and really wanting to better the world by creating a large contribution. So I'm really happy that we've been able to keep that spirit alive, because this project has been going on for a long time. It's at least open to the public since 2019, like July 29th, 2019, I believe, was the first block on the Helium network, and the day that the first hotspots were onboarded. So
yeah,
it's come a long way since then.
It's an absolutely great ride. I mean, just kind of looking at the momentum and just the enthusiasm not waning. I think that hit 50. I mean, if you almost trace back the origins of this. I mean, so first I look at the mission hasn't changed. It's always been all about connectivity for all, and it's always been the idea of community open infrastructure that's propagating wireless and connectivity around the world. And you think about Helium Inc., now Nova Labs. This was not a blockchain project to start. It was always about solving that IoT connectivity problem. And once they really unlocked that incentive, leveraging blockchain technology, it was really off to the races. And I think this conversation, that the genesis of it, and Boris can probably speak to this more, is when we started talking about trying to think about how we, FreedomFi coming in, and how do you leverage this model to start to propagate, cellular and 5G coverage, where you had somebody coming in from the outside, and, Boris at FreedomFi, and saying, let's, look at where we can leverage him for the next wireless network. And from there, it just became, how do we scale this up to any wireless network that wants to leverage the same types of incentives, this amazing global community. And what started with, I think it was HIP 27, and thinking about different models for data credits. Now we have HIP 51 that we've been talking about for a few months now, on multiple community calls. There's been a lot of activity in Discord, with the idea that each of these networks will need its own independent governance, its own unique proof of coverage model, different economics based on the volume of data transfer that goes through. So this is really, I'm incredibly excited about it from the foundation perspective, because it took a conversation and a concept of how do we think about multiple networks and actually creating the framework to do so. So I'm really excited to have everybody else joining today and talking about these kind of different opportunities for other networks to leverage Helium, but then also for this huge global community of Helium hosts and participant builders to be able to then kind of participate in new networks, 5G, Wi-Fi, and then looking at decentralized VPN of, again, security, privacy, these very critical, important elements of censorship resistance for Web3. So I could keep going on and waxing poetic for a while, but I want to make sure we get a chance to speak on their own projects. I think that's what everybody's here to discuss. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to introduce sort of the day and the panel. And I think, just to piggyback again off of what you're saying, Scott, it really just gets me excited that all of the changes that we're discussing today that are being proposed are born of necessity and of learning. These aren't like frivolous changes that are being proposed because, someone wants to like invent the next big thing or whatever. This is like, we have actually realized through experimentation and testing that there can be more than one protocol, right? We can have LoRaWAN and we can have cellular 5G. And that the Helium economic model is not limited to these two protocols. In fact, it actually happens to fit a lot of other ideas quite well that don't necessarily even exist in the wireless space. So today's discussion and panel is about growing the Helium ecosystem beyond the protocols that you're familiar with today to things that you may not have even thought of. We've got some great guests, which I'll introduce in a minute, but I want to frame this by looking at HIP 51. So this is the proposal that's been circulating for some time. It's been on GitHub for many months. It's been in discussion for many months, and it's undergone significant revisions. It's been architected by a few community members, and it's been iterated on. I don't even know what number of revision we're on now, but a lot has changed, a lot has been simplified since this thing was introduced. And it's a complex proposition. It's not something that you're going to read in 5 minutes and say, okay, I fully understand everything here. But it's worth getting into because it architects an outline for a very ambitious vision of how the network can grow and expand beyond the protocols of today. And that Helium need not be limited to wireless protocols, but rather can be a network of networks. Think of kind of like a hub and spoke model, which all work together to sort of mutually benefit one another in a symbiotic relationship, where there's one Helium DAO, and then there are sub-DAOs for each wireless protocol, and they all have their own specific functions. So I'm just going to do a quick read of some of the HIP 51 summary so that the initial author's points can get across to this audience in the initial author's words. So this proposal outlines economic and technological constructions with the aim of scaling the Helium network to support new users, devices, and types of decentralized network protocols, DNPs. We propose that each communications network built on top of the Helium network, LoRaWAN, Wi-Fi, 5G, CDN, VPN, again referred to as DNPs, has its own sub-DAO. Now, for anyone who might not be as familiar with Web3 terminology, a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. Think of it as kind of the new version of a company with autonomous rules that are solidified in smart contracts and sort of a looser organizational structure. So each one of these DAOs has its own token, referred to as decentralized network tokens, or DNTs. These key specifications of DNP, such as the proof of coverage rules, mining rewards, and data transfer pricing, are governed by each DNP sub-DAO. So to break that down a little bit, that basically means that there are these sub-DAOs, right? There's a LoRaWAN sub-DAO, there's a 5G sub-DAO, there could be a VPN sub-DAO, and each of them get to set their own rules on things that we take for granted today, like what percentage of rewards go to proof of coverage, what percentage of rewards go to validators, or oracles as they're called in this proposal. And they really get to decide what is the economic structure within the larger Helium umbrella of economics that fits their exact use case and is necessary to incentivize the things that they want to incentivize. So each sub-DAO can tailor their economics exactly how they want. The aim is to create an economy such that underlying HNT data credit burn and mint equilibrium continues to power the Helium flywheel, while proof of coverage rules and earnings are dictated by the corresponding sub-DAO. So that was the author's words, but kind of like I just explained, we're keeping HNT as the center of everything. And data credits are still the unit of currency, non-fungible currency, not to mean like NFTs, but rather that it simply can't be traded or moved once it is created, that is used to pay for services on every single sub-DAO. And what that means is when any sub-DAO is successful in creating traffic or data transfer or usage of any kind through data credits, that increases the value of HNT, because HNT needs to be bought and burned in order to create data credits. So this technical model, this is the author's words again, requires that the entire Helium network, tokens, hotspots, emissions rules, governance, etc., lives at some proposed base layer blockchain, a layer 1, and all accounts and transaction activity happens at this layer 1. The decision on which layer 1 to use will be based on the technical and economic evaluation of the requirements of this proposal. Furthermore, all sub-DAOs must operate oracles for their networks. So these oracles, you can think of the validators that exist today that are essentially doing most of the proof of coverage stuff for LoRaWAN as the oracles for the new LoRaWAN sub-DAO, for example. Each sub-DAO oracle runs software to calculate DNP specific items, so proof of coverage, for example, and the sub-DAO oracles who have staked DNTs come to consensus on these calculations and submit them to the Helium network. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to have like an architectural diagram in their head after I explain that, because it's still complicated and probably takes a few times of reading to truly grasp. But basically, we have the Helium layer 1. The Helium network exists on a layer 1, whether that is the layer 1 we have now or some other layer 1 like Solana, Avalanche, etc. And then you have the sub-DAOs, which each have their own validators, set their own rules, and can operate independently as governing bodies to drive the incentives that their networks need to survive and thrive. So that's an overview of HIT 51. And we have 3 guests today who I think are really great examples of what HIT 51 can enable. So our first guest is Boris Rensky, CEO of FreedomFi. So FreedomFi is the current cellular partner of Nova Labs, which we all know and love. Hopefully you've heard of them if you've looked into Helium 5G. Next, we have Karam, hope I pronounced that right, co-founder of Wifi Dabba, which is a company deploying public Wi-Fi hotspots at micro retailers across the city of Bangalore in India. They currently have an ambitious goal of 100,000 Wi-Fi hotspots at neighborhood tea stalls around Bangalore city in 2022. And finally, we have Moby from Boring Protocol, which is a decentralized VPN protocol built on Solana. And as you'll notice, only 2 out of the 3 are actually wireless protocols. A VPN is not a wireless protocol, but it has some really interesting synergies with the hardware that can be used in these other projects, potentially. So I really want to thank all the guests for showing up to this panel. I think it's going to be a great way to get people to understand why HIT 51 is a thing that could grow and expand the scope of the Helium network and why you all might want to do it, and how it can bring more types of use cases into the Helium ecosystem that actually complement each other and build upon each other in a way that we're stronger together instead of siloed in different sort of regions of the Web3 ecosystem and not really talking to each other. So that being said, I want to invite up, let's see, we have Boris up here. Okay, we do. Great. First, I want to invite up Boris. Boris, I'd love if you could just speak a little bit about FreedomFi and your mission for people who might not be as familiar with what you do, and why you're excited about Helium. What does it enable for FreedomFi that maybe you didn't have before you integrated with Helium? Boris, if you're there, you're muted, I think.
Hello?
There you go.
Can you guys hear me now? Okay,
yes.
Perfect.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Arman, for the intro, and apologies for the logistical challenges with the unmute button. So I think that a lot of people in the Helium community know about FreedomFi, but to sum it up, we are focused on building a neutral host 5G network. So to explain what that is, I can take a step back and kind of explain in bigger brushstrokes, like why first. So as all of you know, the cellular space is growing and more data is being transferred basically over the air. And as this happens, more and more capacity in the form of spectrum needs to become available for mobile networks. And unfortunately, the physics of the, how mobile networks work is such that as you look for more capacity, you have to move into the higher frequency spectrum bands, which is what a lot of people have heard about, this concept of millimeter wave and ultra low latency and ultra high throughput, which have largely, for most people, become synonymous with 5G. And the issue with getting that capacity and moving into the higher frequency bands is that higher frequency bands don't generally go through walls very well. Unlike the historic networks that have been built in like sub 1 gigahertz bands, millimeter wave bands, or anything that's higher than generally 6 gigahertz doesn't go very well through walls. And this is like very important tenet to understand, because this is dramatically changes the kind of like economics and dynamics of how the cellular networks should be built going forward. Because historically, all cellular networks have been built by a handful of operators in this top-down fashion, where an operator would buy some chunk of spectrum, and then they would go and partner with a company like American Tower or Crown Castle to buy some towers, put up the radios, and you have like one tower cover half the city. And everything was about a relatively small number of large, very powerful cells that would blast the signal very far. Now, as more and more data finds its way to the network, hello, I'm back. Can you guys hear me again? I just got a phone call.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said as more and more data goes through the network.
Cool. So as more and more data goes through the network, there is a need to deploy denser networks. And that means that now, instead of deploying these large macro sites, you need to deploy many small cells, as they call them. And the problem of deploying many small cells is that you, like, as an operator, if you're like an AT&T or Verizon, you can't literally go to, every coffee shop or every apartment building and go and negotiate kind of like the rights of way contract to put a small cell into their location. And because of that, this changes dramatically the way that the networks are built in general. And it moves from this kind of exclusively tops-down paradigm to a combination of tops-down and bottoms-up. And this bottoms-up component that is built by a number of sort of separate entities is becoming bigger and bigger in the grand scheme of things as more and more data finds its way to the cellular networks. So having kind of spotted this concept at FreedomFi, our mission was like, okay, so how can we really enable this bottoms up build out of these small cell networks and create one large neutral host network that can then be used to complement the macro networks of the operators to kind of, sort of play into this bigger theme. And as most of you know, we've spent most of our efforts on the engineering side, basically solving the problem of simplifying the process of deploying a 5G small cell. Because historically, because of how the industry works, it's a fairly complex process. So, I think that we've done the work and we've simplified now, to the point where I would argue deploying a 5G small cell is as simple as it would be to deploy a Wi-Fi access point using things like a FreedomFi gateway and a number of certified small cells that we've introduced to the market in conjunction with our radio partners. And Helium in this context becomes an instrumental enabler to actually create the proper kind of a economic dynamic between all of these individual deployers. Because if you're no longer a single entity, but you are deploying a network where you have, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of varying entities, ranging from like an individual that's, has a house on top of the hill, all the way to, somebody that's maybe like a local, regional operator of tower infrastructure. And they're all effectively collaborating to build this one neutral host network. You need something like Helium to properly align economic incentives, and then also, very importantly, kind of tie this all into the bigger network for the whole thing to work. So, I think that in our very peculiar case of what we are going after as a company, like having something like Helium is a must. And in that vein, I think that, this podcast and this announcement that we're doing around now Helium's move to this, multi-layer model, I would say, with HIP 51 is very much an enabler for what we're doing and very much an instrumental part for, making our vision a reality. So maybe I pause here on the intro.
So for people who aren't as familiar with the origin story of FreedomFi, what was the moment that you transitioned from your original business model to kind of going all in on the idea of building as part of the Helium network?
Yeah, well, I think that, originally we were on the path of just, like I said, focusing very hard on solving the technology problem of sort of consumerizing and simplifying the process of small cell deployments. And when we announced our first version of the FreedomFi gateway, which had nothing to do initially with blockchain or Helium, Abai, who is the chief product officer at Helium, reached out on Twitter, I think. And he's like, oh, we have this big vision on building decentralized wireless networks. We already have seen a fair amount of success with LoRa network. And you guys have done, some amazing work simplifying 5G small cell deployments. Can we pilot and see what can happen together? And, I at that time was already a big enthusiast of Helium. I've owned the OG Helium miner, and I've always in the back of my mind kind of had the thought that this idea of creating this large neutral host network could really be accelerated if you add the kind of decentralized blockchain based component to it. But I never had a crystal clear picture in my head as to what that means and how, because there's so many things and so much complexity when it comes to cellular networks that just simply very hard to map to, like the decentralized primitives of like, how blockchains work. So when, Abai came over, I'm like, oh yes, that's, that'll be a perfect marriage, right? Like this is like what we're trying to do with what Helium's out to do. Like if there was just a way to kind of, power through all of that complexity somehow and make that work, that would be just a completely killer value proposition for building neutral host networks going forward. So, we spent probably a few months trying to like pilot it and put it together and see how it works and build sort of a prototype of reconciliation of building data into state channels on Helium testnet. And like, it seemed like, it's like, it's going to work. And ultimately, we kind of announced to the community that, hey, we're going to do this thing. I think it was in April about a year ago, and were met with absolutely unprecedented level of enthusiasm. And some of the, not just like individuals, but even many commercial entities that interested in actually, participating in this kind of bottoms-up build-out of the network that, as like the non-blockchain, non-Helium version of FreedomFi would otherwise have to go and like, knock their doors down and try to like talk to them, all of a sudden have come to us in droves, and they're like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. How can we partner? So we got a bunch of people that are, different commercial real estate operators, regional tower operators, vending machine operators, companies that operate street signs, like, next to every freeway in America. And we just got like a line out the door and around the corner of these kind of entities all of a sudden that are just like flowing into this movement. And I think that once we've seen that, not only is it us that has this crazy idea of building this kind of bottoms up mutual host network, but there is this whole ecosystem around the Helium community of the like-minded people that are very willing to actually work with us and help make this thing happen and help accelerate forward. We're like, okay, well, that's it. That basically we have to commit ourselves 100% and just, go full throttle down that path.
I like that you pointed out that Helium has a community of like-minded individuals who are looking to pursue things like deploying cellular networks. I think that speaks to sort of the idea behind HIP 51 and why it's so powerful, is that by bringing together all these networks where we can have a shared economic incentive, you actually have a group of really dedicated people who are interested in, not just deploying a 5G radio, but also maybe hosting a VPN node on their hotspot hardware, or also deploying a LoRaWAN node in that same location or a nearby location to their 5G radio, or maybe even hosting a node for a CDN, right? That like-mindedness, I think, is a big advantage to all participants, every single sub-DAO in the Helium network, that, from the sort of enthusiast perspective, you have all the opportunity in the world whenever a new sub-DAO joins the Helium network to pursue whatever that sub-DAO is incentivizing and get involved in what it's building. Maybe get really excited about what it's building because it's something you care about or you think should exist in the world. And sort of gives you a cookie cutter framework of how to get involved. And you can get involved with a familiar economic structure too, with the grounding of HNT and data credits as the center of everything. And then I guess rather than the enthusiast perspective, from the crypto person perspective, right? Someone who might be more familiar on the crypto side and less familiar on the, for example, decentralized wireless side, Helium is an opportunity to discover new protocols that you can participate in and earn rewards for mining that actually do something and are understandable in what they do. And so I think you very clearly exemplify like what is the value of having more projects come into the Helium network and become a network of networks. And I guess Boris, I'll let you add any thoughts to that if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, thanks, Arman. So, I mean, I think that, the only thing I can do here is just to like repeat this in that, I mean, for us, it was kind of like natural because our background at FreedomFi is very like open source heavy. Most of the team members were always, writing open source code and contributing to the open source. And I think that it is true for open source communities, but it's even more true for, I think, blockchain communities, is that a lot of the value, or I would say like most of the value, is not around necessarily like the specifics of the implementation of the blockchain and the specific token. That the power is in the community that is like surrounding it, right? And this is true for, like just pure open source projects that have nothing to do with blockchain directly, like Magma, which is what we've been using to basically build out this 5G neutral host network in collaboration with Helium. And it's also very, very much true for like the blockchain communities, and that like Helium is not just like a token that is, like for LoRa data. I mean, it is that for sure, but first and foremost, it's the community of people that are really passionate about building out decentralized wireless ecosystem. And yes, it's true that the kind of the first manifestation of this DY network was the IoT network powered by LoRa, but like people participating in the community, they all believe in like the DY concept as like this large movement, right? And it is that part that I think is more valuable than just the initial implementation that Helium had with LoRa. And I think that this like HIP 51 proposal is a way to very openly sort of, kind of make a statement to the community. Hey, like, okay, well, now we acknowledge that, there's, value in this community, and we're opening up to the community to actually leverage and build on top. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like one specific protocol or one specific like use case, but it can be a whole gist of use cases. And with HIP 51, here's this template for everybody that you can actually follow. And if you follow this template, you can immediately tap into this community and basically, help accelerate the DY infrastructure build out.
Yeah, that's some great perspective. And I think the template that you're mentioning is only going to become more refined with time. I think all of the projects we have on the panel today could easily be considered early adopters of the Helium ecosystem. I mean, to be completely blunt, like this HIP 51 has not even passed or hasn't even been put up for vote yet. So I don't know what could possibly be earlier than you're interested in Helium because of a proposal that is currently in the works that you might be able to participate in and doesn't have necessarily the most defined boundaries or framework yet. So I think that's really exciting for all three panel projects up here, that you are like here at this very early point. And certainly if the early projects can make a successful implementation and prove that there is benefit to be gained here, I think that future projects will have an easier time even than you did, sort of getting involved, getting excited, and actually implementing a integration with the Helium network and becoming a sub-DAO. So thank you, Boris. I really appreciate all those words. I think that was a great way to get us started here.
Thanks, Arman.
All right. Next, I'd like to invite up Karam. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect pronunciation. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Yeah, welcome. I'm super excited to have you up here. We are only just meeting for the first time here, but I really am intrigued by the sound of your project. Wi-Fi Dabba. And before I ask you to introduce it, I think one of the things that has been talked about a lot is adding cellular to the Helium network, right? Having a 5G sub-DAO, but I think Wi-Fi doesn't get nearly as much attention. And I don't know if most people know this, but Wi-Fi is kind of the only sub-DAO that exists in the sort of more high bandwidth wireless space that currently can exist outside of the United States, because the cellular is limited to CBRS, which is a United States specific law and spectrum frequency. So Wi-Fi is really interesting. It's global, right? The hardware is a lot more commodity. And for all those reasons, I'm really interested to hear more about Wi-Fi Dabba and what you've done so far and how you're looking to leverage Helium to take your project to the next level.
Absolutely. And yeah, thanks so much for making that point. You're right. One of the amazing things about Wi-Fi is how it sits in this amazing sweet spot where it's already fairly widely deployed. Users already consume a tremendous amount of data through it, and it's actually largely a untapped resource. So to give you an idea of how we started, and I think you'll find that a lot of what I'm going to say echoes a number of things that Boris has said, and I think more future participants will echo as they join the Helium ecosystem, because the journeys are actually fairly surprisingly similar. Um, so I'm one of the co-founders of Wi-Fi Dabba, and we started in 2017, almost 5 years ago, with a mission to lower the cost of broadband access and bring a billion people in India online. The reason we wanted to do this was India was going through this 4G data boom where people were consuming vast amounts of data on newly launched 4G networks that were delivering high-speed data to mobile phones. But as their appetite for data consumption increased and they wanted to move to being able to get broadband or Wi-Fi access, most people found that uh, India has deeply under-penetrated broadband access, and it's incredibly expensive. To give you a sense of scale, less than 7% of India has a broadband connection when compared to 80% of people in more developed nations. And you've seen the kind of impact that India and Indians have had on the internet, and this is with this little level of broadband access. So we took a strong look at what could we do to help that situation and bring people faster, cheaper, effectively unlimited internet access. And we found that really the big problem that was blocking proliferation of high-speed data was the fact that laying out traditional broadband networks is incredibly expensive for one fundamental reason. The core technology that governs any broadband network, doesn't matter where it is in the world, is fundamentally a network of underground fiber. So let's say you wanted to deploy a broadband system across a city. You'd have to get local permits from pretty much every neighborhood and government. You'd have to dig up the roads, lay underground fiber, and that takes hundreds of millions of dollars and years worth of work. And as a result of which, broadband internet connections are fairly expensive, especially for places like India. So we spent a huge chunk of time and we spent a ton of engineering effort and have built what we think is the ultimate low-cost broadband sort of stack in the world. Instead of using expensive, time-consuming underground fiber to create a core network, which then connects to consumers, we actually use lasers mounted on rooftops and telecom towers to create this little grid over a city. Think of it like the same way that Starlink works up in space, except this is rooftops and telecom towers. So we've got this laser grid using proprietary lasers that we've created that we hope to be able to scale dramatically in the future. And this grid of lasers allows us to deliver incredibly cheap internet access to homes, offices, and retail. The reason that we can do this is because we use these lasers, we're able to save that time and that money and therefore pass on the cost to consumers. So we spent a solid couple of years building and testing this system. And we deployed thousands of Wi-Fi hotspots across our hometown of Bangalore. And as we were deploying these hotspots over the last couple of years, we started receiving a tremendous amount of love from the community, simply because we were able to deliver faster, cheaper internet access than anyone had ever had before. And as we started getting more and more engaged with our own community, we sort of started walking down this path of decentralization where we realized a lot of the community wanted to be able to build and operate parts of the network on their own and expand it in ways that they found useful. And so we ended up coming up with systems and processes where people could own hotspots and mint cryptocurrency and a whole bunch of things like that. As we were doing this, we kept hearing from our community about the Helium project. And as time went on, not a day would go by where one of our partners or one of our community people would call us and be like, "Hey, have you heard of this thing called Helium? It's amazing." And as we started taking a closer look at Helium, we realized that, yeah, there was a tremendous amount that we had in common, both in terms of the vision, the journey that they had, and how they were approaching um, building out sort of decentralized networks. So over the last couple of months, we've gotten a chance to, connect with the folks at Helium, people from the community, people from the team, investors, and that entire ecosystem. And we found that there's genuinely a deep love and passion and ability to execute on this vision of being able to build this community. So it made perfect sense to us that instead of sort of reinventing the wheel, and I think one of the points that you made earlier, where Web3 provides this fascinating opportunity where instead of constantly building competing solutions, you can actually find a way in which to sort of build cooperative solutions that fit a larger goal. So the thing that we love about Helium is, as Boris mentioned earlier, this massive community of people that are passionate about the idea of connectivity, but also, as Boris mentioned again, the amount of infrastructure work that has already been put in with regard to creation of a blockchain, the rules around it, how the system works, and that sort of thing. So when we took a look at that, we love the Helium community, we love the infrastructure that it provides, and we think that it provides that opportunity to, sort of stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were, and reach a little bit further for some more stars. And, in return, we think that the cool things that we can bring to the community is India is the second largest telecom market in the world. It's got a tremendous amount of headroom to grow. We're aggressively deploying as many hotspots as we can over there, and we're also going to be expanding internationally. And as one of the things that you mentioned right at the top of the question was Wi-Fi is incredible because it transcends borders. It shares a tremendous similarity in terms of throughput and abilities like 5G and small cells, and it has advantages with regard to being internationally accessible. And yeah, the last thing I'd like to add is we're also excited to bring our laser backhaul technology to the Helium ecosystem over time, something that we hope to make more, announcements and explorations about in the future. And just to wrap it up, in the context of HIP 51, and like you mentioned, it's just a proposal and hasn't been voted on, and there's still a lot of work going on it. It's actually uh, an excellent framework that provides the ability for more projects to come in while providing this common bonding structure, but also giving room and freedom to be able to deal with the nitty gritties and the special bits of either code or rules or structures that are required by each individual project. So yeah, that's our quick intro. We've put a lot of work into building networks over the last 5 years, and we're really excited to explore taking it further with the Helium community.
Karam, you're blowing my mind here. You just said so much cool stuff. I almost don't know where to start asking questions. But I guess to sort of direct it at the economic angle, yeah, talk a little bit more, if you could, about the way that you were incentivizing people to deploy these hotspots and how that might shift in the Helium context, I imagine it was quite hard to orchestrate all of that, and especially considering that you're aiming to have 100,000 of these hotspots deployed by the end of 2022.
Yeah, for sure. Just to be clear, this is a bit of a work in progress. As I mentioned, we're talking to folks in the community and exploring what the best way to do this is. But broadly speaking, one of the sort of new concepts we would like to introduce to the community, and as I mentioned, this is definitely a work in process, is the idea of a managed service. So one of the things that we have had great success for, and we have sold thousands of hotspots already like this, is so we've got engineers from Netflix, Apple, Google, you name the company all around the world that have bought hotspots on our network that we manage and deploy. So we handle the whole system end to end, right? We handle installation, maintenance, operation, right? We will figure out what the best home, retail, or office location the hotspot should be installed in. And in return for having purchased that hotspot, a share of the cryptocurrency that is minted would be provided to the hotspot owner. We're also exploring, being able to integrate the gig economy sort of approach into on-ground operations and installation so that you can truly decentralize this on a global scale. We have a bunch of ideas coming forward about this. There's a concept that we call basically an ISP in a box, right? One of the basic ideas is this. Let's say you're literally one of the 1,000 cities in India that have a population of 1 million people or greater, and you don't have good broadband access. If you're an interested person in the community in that particular city, we will be able to ship you a container with a bunch of our lasers, a bunch of the Wi-Fi hotspots, all of the cabling and everything necessary, right? It's literally an ISP in a container that you could receive and effectively set up a city-scale broadband network for your community in a matter of weeks. This is unprecedented. This has never been done before. So just sort of talking about that relationship and more directly to the question that you asked, we're really looking at exploring decoupling geographical ownership of the hotspot and the actual place where the hotspot might be installed and located. And to that end, we're working on proposals and ideas for what is the best way to distribute rewards in such a system, both to the person that has purchased said hotspot and to the parties required, for the physical bits to maintain, deploy, and operate that hotspot. And I just want to throw in sort of one little additional point into this is a really good way for people to think about this is in a lot of ways, we're like a layer zero solution. Like if you got a LoRa WAN hotspot, or perhaps even a 5G one, or even the VPN or new things, there's a bit of a requirement where you need to have a sort of underlying broadband connection to plug that into, right? Whereas we're putting a lot of work in emerging markets into being able to deploy Wi-Fi where broadband itself does not exist. So we've got to bring in that entire infrastructure to be able to deliver that system. And thanks to some incredible advances that we've made in terms of backhaul and processes and that sort of thing, we think that we have a dramatically scalable solution that we hope to take forward fairly soon.
That is all incredibly exciting. I love the ISP in a box. I don't know why it makes me think of the game Borderlands for some reason, but imagining just receiving a crate and you pop it open and there's all this equipment and lasers and stuff in it, and it's kind of just like your ragtag setup, you're go, deploy. That is so cool. And what I really like about what you just said is you kind of laid out very clearly how Helium provides the core infrastructure, right? The data credits, HNT, and then the sub-DAO. Within the sub-DAO, you can define your own parameters for how you want to run the network. All of the business models and opportunities that you just mentioned, you can build your managed solution. You can configure your layer 2 however you'd like. And then on top of that is yet another layer of people on the ground hosting and deploying. And maybe there's even a layer in between there of all the management and infrastructure that goes into shipping and manufacturing and shipping these hotspots and laser systems. And so I think it's kind of a very elegant layered architecture where there's a separation, a clear separation of concerns amongst each layer. And that allows for tremendous scalability. And that's kind of the whole theme of HIP 51. We're scaling the Helium network from one network to a network of networks. And within each network, that network is also dramatically more scalable than the LoRaWAN network that we have today, because it's much more flexible to configure itself in exactly the way that it needs to perform the most optimal function. So thank you so much for sharing all that stuff. I almost want to just say, like, keep going, right? Share like as much as you can. And I will give you a few more minutes because, I mean, any additional thoughts that you have, I'd love to hear. This project is really interesting to me.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I'd like to just sort of chime into the bigger picture that you were talking about earlier. Like in my head, I sort of call it the of course principle when we think about the future. Like Helium provides a roadmap to this future where, of course, I only want one data credit that I can use and apply as a consumer across networks and across data services. Like I've always found it remarkably idiotic that you have one cell phone service subscription, you have an internet service subscription, you may have another one for your IoT, you may have another one for your VPN, you may have another one for your cloud service. And, there is definitely a world to look forward to where there is a standard data credit that you can use to roam across all of these services, fundamentally defined by packets and IP. And I think that Helium's got this really exciting roadmap for that future. And it's really interesting because in a deep number of ways that we can talk about at some other point, data and currency have a really deep relationship in terms of slightly sort of being able to be transmogrified into each other. But yeah, just wanted to throw that in. I love the direction things are headed in, and we're really excited. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be able to talk about the things that we've been working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you're not as well known in the Helium community yet, are you ready to open up? Do you have a Discord community? Can we send people your way to find you somewhere, or is this sort of a work in progress and then you'll sort of share more later?
Definitely a little more work to go. We will definitely hope to be sharing some fun things soon, but as of now, we've got our heads down, sort of just working on the bits and bobs to make sure that the whole system is refined, articulate, comprehensible, and useful.
Awesome. I love it. Only ship it when it's ready. Great. Well, thank you so much, Karan. That was very insightful. I'd like to invite up our final guest, which is Boring Protocol. Now, this is the only panelist up here that is not decentralized wireless, and is part of why I'm so interested to hear what Moby from Boring Protocol has to say. Boring Protocol is a decentralized VPN, which is currently built on top of Solana, and is a little mysterious. Their webpage it leaves a lot to the imagination. So I'm assuming I'm going to learn a lot today that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And Moby, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Arman, and thank you to the Nova Labs team and the greater Helium community. Happy to share a little bit about Boring today and get to know you guys a little bit better as well. Excellent presentations from Boris and Karam there. Certainly some exciting stuff happening within this ecosystem. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Fomo Dick. I'm the founder of Boring Protocol. We're about a year old. Most of the team are power crypto users who've been within the space for quite a while. We, like most others, enjoy exploring new projects, and in doing so, found our way to this particular project, which is a DVPN. There are other DVPNs within the space, but we feel that those, left a lot to be desired. So we figured the best way to have a good DVPN for crypto was to build it ourselves. So appreciate you guys hearing us out. We're pretty significantly different than the other projects that shared today, but happy to explore the HIT 51 with y'all and see how that applies to us and future networks. You talk about the application and the growth and potential utility of Helium. All kinds of things can come to mind within the long tail of that. So, a VPN such as us, a proxy network, decentralized storage, all of that seems applicable in our minds to what it is that HIP 51 has set out to accomplish. And we've been nothing but excited over the last few months to explore that HIP and kind of explore the other HIPs, HIP 52 and HIP 53, and find some common ground that this may be able.
Oh, lost you there for a second. You said find some common ground.
Yeah, find some way for a VPN to not only fit into that economic model, but provide that privacy layer, that privacy solution to users of the network. So, kind of where we're at with it. We have shipped our first hardware device several months ago. But our network is live right now in closed beta to those participants who purchased our hardware, what we call the motherboard. So there's a lot of testing going on right now within our network. And we are also exploring this potential usage where our protocol would be able to be used on existing hardware for Helium. Now, that's all very early testing and exploration on our part, but there's a lot of great advantages that we feel could come of that. Everybody's pretty well aware of the supply chain issues and the difficulty in sourcing hardware right now, and a sustainable approach in our mind is to be able to circulate the software that runs our protocol to those who already have the existing hardware through their Helium nodes. So excited about that. Who's to say what that leads to, but we're definitely hard at it trying to make it work for not only for the Helium community, but for our community as well, which there's a lot of crossover there. So
Great. I'd love to understand a little bit more about the unique value proposition of Boring Protocol. There are a lot of VPNs out there, and for people who don't know about VPNs, they're virtual private networks, essentially a private tunnel to send all of your phone or internet traffic through to increase security, privacy, anonymity. So, what is the difference between a decentralized VPN like Boring and a centralized VPN? What is the advantage that we're looking for here?
yeah, so in line with decentralization itself and with crypto and the kind of privacy and anonymity that the two bring, Boring Protocol kind of adds another layer of it doesn't kind of it adds another layer of privacy, and that rather than going and signing up for a traditional VPN subscription and giving your personal information, your name, billing address, credit card info, you could just connect a wallet, a crypto wallet, and fund your usage through our native token, which is the Bob token. And away you go. So there's that added layer of privacy there. But then you talk about things like anti-fragility and decentralization. Rather than having a central server routing all this traffic, we have these nodes everywhere, and it kind of reduces that central point of failure. So you have you have what's called hop nodes in a VPN network, and they encrypt and route traffic to what are called exit nodes, and users connect through these exit nodes and access their content. Some of you might be familiar with geo hopping, and that's a pretty prevalent use case for VPNs, where you have particular geopolitical regions which restrict access to certain content. And we feel that that's an important thing to overcome when you talk about DeFi and this internet economy as a whole. Giving people access to information, regardless of where they are in the world, is really important. Beyond that, you have a lot of traditional VPNs that boast no logs. And in our protocol, because it is not hub and spoke, it is, I don't know what you would call it. It's because it's not hub and
Onion
spoke.
routed? It sounds a lot like Tor, the Tor architecture.
Correct. Yeah. What you're looking at is very similar to Tor, with some financial incentivization for the infrastructure.
Got it. And so that makes a lot of sense, right? Especially the censorship angle. I see how the decentralized model would be a lot more advantageous to people who are living in countries that may be censoring them, right? It's a lot easier for a nationalized ISP to track down and block centralized VPN servers. But when you get to decentralizing it, there could be new VPNs popping up all the time. And it would be almost impossible to just create a list of them and sort of ban them all together. So that's amazing for sort of censorship resistance in the literal sense, not in the almost metaphorical sense that we often use in the blockchain world. So that is very cool. And of course, the idea of running the VPN software on Helium hotspots, I mean, what more perfect a day to bring that up than today, which is the day when all the hotspots lose the need for like 95% of their computing power. This is a really interesting replacement for all of that. So you talked a little bit about incentivizing the users, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit. How does the Helium protocol and what we're doing here with HIP 51 help Boring Protocol scale and gain new users?
Yeah, so circling back to kind of what I mentioned with the supply chain issues, we have a approach for sustainability, and utilizing the hardware that's already out there and in people's hands is really important to us. There's certain logistical challenges to getting new node operators online, which we're moving towards greater software solutions that you could run this protocol on essentially any type of device, whether it be mobile or PC, and we see benefit to the Helium community in the added potential revenue from running our protocol and becoming a DVPN node. But beyond that, the more, for lack of a better term, selfish vision of it is that the greater node count that we have on our network, the more opportunity we have to service customers of our VPN. So there's greater obfuscation with more nodes, and there's at some point too many different IP addresses for these exit points to create any reasonable form of censorship for. So that's kind of the motive behind it. But beyond that, I think there, as I said, there's a lot of crossover between our community and the Helium community. Everybody really likes their little node device, their hardware device, whether it be a motherboard or a Helium miner or validator, and it's really cool to see your community and our community tinkering with those devices and making them more efficient. And the greater number of participants we have in that little experiment, the more efficient our protocol can become. So that's kind of our outlook on that.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a very clear example of the advantage that is given to a business that critically relies on network effect to fulfill its unique value proposition, we are essentially providing a bolstered network effect to Boring Protocol by working together with Boring Protocol as a sub-DAO and the Helium network as a community. So that's super exciting. And I'm sure that, once people learn a little bit more about the project and dig more into it, you'll have a lot of willing participants, especially people who are looking to get more out of their full hotspot hardware. Where can we learn more about you?
A great way to get involved in our community is, get engaged with our socials. We have an excellent Discord with a pretty sizable community that is currently testing and involved in this closed beta that I spoke about earlier. And those people in that community are really the most invaluable portion of our project, because they are constantly onboarding new people and sharing what's kind of going on behind the scenes before we release our public beta. So that's a good way. And then you may keep an eye on our website. I know that you mentioned there's not a lot there currently, but if you keep an eye on that, we got the V2 website coming out soon, which kind of will direct you to not only our documentation, but those different outlets for forum that I mentioned, such as our Discord and our Twitter. Beyond that, the team is very approachable. So if you can catch us, which more often than not you can, we love discussing with the community at large, what's going on and getting their feedback. So.
Great. So yeah, the website is boringprotocol.io. And if you're in this chat, you can also follow at Boring Protocol. You can just tap on their little avatar right up here in the speakers area to easily follow. And I also, Karam, if you're still there, I also wanted to sort of direct that question that I just asked to Boring at you as well, which is, how do you envision that the Helium network integration will help your project scale beyond its current scale, beyond where it currently is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think it's worth sort of zooming out to a slightly bigger picture, and it's the same sort of vision that we share with Helium, which is, how do you build like a communications network on a planetary scale, right? You've got to deploy billions of devices, and you need to have a really strong, committed community that is interested in that big vision. And it's a vision that's really important, because if you take a slightly zoomed out look at like the internet infrastructure of the world today, you find that, in a lot of ways, the internet is sort of splintered, right? You have China with a firewalled off system. Russia looks like it's going to do the same. And you have a whole bunch of other countries with varying degrees of openness or closedness. One of the things, one of the doors that Helium has opened is that there is going to be this future where a lot of the communications infrastructure worldwide is going to be owned by the people. And a lot of this impetus has also come from the philosophy of the crypto world. Like, I think one of the things I love about the way that Boris frames things is there's always going to be some percentage of the network that is going to be run by the people, not necessarily large corporations or governments. And when you want to attempt such a big problem at such a big scale, you need a community like this. And because we share that vision, being able to partner with the Helium community, help them grow with new things that we offer, and being able to take their help both in deploying parts of the network and in coming up with new ideas and ways of doing things is invaluable. And on a really practical level, just to reiterate another point that was made earlier, it is deeply helpful that Helium is doing things like creating the necessary set of primitives that allow these networks to grow and talk to each other, creating structures within the hips that allow new things to come in. These are things that if we don't have to replicate ourselves, and we can take advantage of the fact that Helium is doing this, allows us to move much faster, deliver better results, and be able to scale things a lot better. So yeah, Helium is a turbocharging force unlike any other right now when it comes to building out new networks.
I really love what you just said, because it sort of exemplifies the difference between what we're building here in the Helium community in contrast with what currently exists in the traditional world of data and telecom. You have this sort of highly competitive adversarial environment where you have, in the cellular world, for example, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. They all have overlapping towers in every city. They're all buying different chunks of spectrum to provide essentially the same product to a slightly different set of customers. And they're kind of siloed from one another in a way where each company has to figure out, as you said, those primitives. How do we source location for the towers? How do we get the technology? How do we source these operational experts to install it? How do we figure out our supply chain? How do we acquire customers? All of these things, in some part at least, are elegantly solved by the cooperative nature of Web3 and the Helium network, where we don't necessarily have to fight over the same resources. Instead, we can pool together and sort of just have one of the best version of each network. And of course, a new network and a new sub-DAO can always arise when technology advances. Never in history have we been stuck on one technology forever. There's always change, there's always improvement. But this HIP 51 architecture provides the flexibility to not waste resources, sort of competing over finite things like spectrum, and work cooperatively when needed, while also allowing room for new entrants to come in with disruptive technologies and grow as their own sub-DAO. So that's a vision that I couldn't quite articulate until hearing our panelists today, but I think that's what really at the core gets me super excited about the Helium community every single day, is that is the sort of new world that we can build. And there are so many awesome people and projects who see that vision and align with it. And of course, 3 of those projects are here today. So let's see, so it's 1:15 East Coast time. I would love to take a few questions. Do any of our panelists have to go in the next 15 minutes, like a hard cut?
Yeah, sorry, I've got to head off in 15 minutes, but as you mentioned, if there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Okay, and Scott also wanted to follow up with you. I believe we're hosting another session next week for anyone who can't stay on, right?
Yeah, so next week we'll actually have, it's going to get back to a little more of the focus on the technical and economic merits of the proposals. So we will have a community-wide AMA with an open forum going out, I believe today, that we'll post up again on both the Helium and the Helium Foundation handles. So any questions people want to have? And this is kind of more of a continuation on some of our community call discussions. So folks who want to dive a little bit more into the economic model, technical merits, some of the proposed design, that will be next week with the HIP authors. So we'll have that out soon for folks.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, I will be there as well to host that panel too. And that will be much more of a conversational AMA style, clarifying questions type of discussion. But Karam, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for your contributions today, and really looking forward to getting to know more about Wi-Fi Dabba. And to other 2 panelists, I would like to invite up a few questions. Let's see, let's go for the next 13 minutes. We won't be able to take that many questions, but we've got 230 people in here. Let's not waste it. Please request to speak if you're interested. And I believe, Scott, you'll have to manage this since I'm not a co-host.
Looks like we got a couple here, so I'm going to go, Veggie had requested first. So, actually, I think we got Phil coming in first. All right, I think we have him as speakers. Veggie, you want to start off? I know you had requested a little while ago.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for letting me come up. I was only able to catch the tail end of this Twitter space, so I only know, I guess, Helium at a very high level. So I just wanted to ask about I guess when it comes to disrupting telcos, that's obviously a big market opportunity, but like there are other groups trying to do this too, like ASTS, for example, that's trying to disrupt, needing cell towers and that sort of thing. So maybe it's an obvious question, but like how does Helium end up disrupting the existing sort of space? Like, is it a matter of people coming together and buying up where cell towers would go, or is it making certain information about like which spectrum bands are bought more open source? I guess just on a high level, like how does Helium fit into it? And if it's an obvious question, forgive me, but I just wanted to, I guess, ask if that's okay.
Sure. Well, so the Helium sub-DAO or project that is doing the cellular side of things is FreedomFi. So I'll hand it over to Boris in a second. But sort of high level, Helium creates the coordination layer for us to utilize the existing CBRS spectrum in the United States to deploy in the sort of 3.5 gigahertz range. As far as things like buying spectrum, that's like a big vision, like maybe doable, some amount of years down the road, like maybe with some crazy spectrum DAO type thing. But there are other ways that are more subtle, other than like literal things like purchasing tower locations and spectrum, that the Helium network does to sort of coordinate this activity.
Yeah, Arman, so to speak to this question, first of all, it's important to understand that at least what we're trying to do in the mobile or cellular DAO is by no means to like completely kill or disrupt, AT&Ts or Verizons of the world. What we are doing is basically deploying this crowdsourced small cell network to offload data and create additional densification for the networks that are already there, and are very much partnering with the MNOs and MVNOs to help them basically densify this network. The specific question was like if there's other entities that are like building towers or buying up towers, like how is this different? So like, the way that it's different is that instead of doing it tops down, in case of Helium mobile DAO, we're doing it bottoms up. So it's various, individuals or entities that already have assets that are well suited for serving as the mobile data offload point that can now basically, get additional ROI on that asset. So, if you're a guy that has a house that overlooks the city of San Francisco, you can, put a CBRS small cell and create coverage in, certain sections that are, close to you. Or if you are a company that operates, like vending machines all over the US, you already have a vending machines, you already have a backhaul. Now, how do you get out more out of that asset? Because you're already in there. So like, go ahead and pop in an indoor small cell into your vending machine, and you're now a 5G offload point for an operator like Dish. And I can kind of keep going as an example. And what Helium allows to do is for all of these separate entities to trustlessly kind of coordinate into a single network and share the rewards in proportion to the value that they bring to the network, and effectively also, in the form of the tokens, kind of co-own part of the network. So if the network grows and more data comes to the network, then, ultimately you're almost like, you're not just getting like, per gigabyte monetary return. You can choose to hold on to the token, and you can kind of ride in the long-term appreciation of this crowdsourced 5G deployment. So that's the general, I guess, difference between Helium and some of the others that are out there.
Sure, that's really great. Good context. Is an okay way of thinking about it that Helium lets people in the community start their own MVNO, or are you helping extract value out of existing MVNOs, or both? Or
well, I mean, I think it would be a tall ask of anybody to ask them to start their own MVNO. It's not, such a simple task, particularly
Sure.
in the US. But, we are partnering with MVNOs to drive data into the network. As far as the community is concerned, like what we ask a community to do is to, basically get a Helium compatible small cell. And if you have a good place to put it, like put it in so that the MVNOs that we've partnered with, like Gig Sky, like Dish that has a portfolio of MVNOs, can offload data into that, access point.
So to make it super clear, like for one of the Dish portfolio companies is Boost Mobile, they have millions of subscribers. There will be a point in the near future where someone with a Boost Mobile SIM can go buy your small cell in the coffee shop, for example, and roam onto that small cell. And then Boost will be paying you directly through the Helium network on behalf of that subscriber for sending data through your cell, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure, definitely. That's really all I got. So thanks for letting me come up, and thanks for hosting a Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I just want to quickly address, I think what maybe made you ask that question is that I said that, there's this sort of wasteful model where you have competing giants. I meant to use that as a metaphor. I didn't mean that we would literally disrupt that model like anytime soon, but just kind of a metaphor for how things are and how things could be.
Sure, fair enough. Makes sense.
All right, I think we had Phil next.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. My name is Philip. I'm a real estate developer based in Eastern Zambia in Africa, and we're mainly an emerging economy out here. What this opportunity gives us is that we don't have any infrastructure at all. Despite there being some growing cellular infrastructure with the 4G networks recently. My question is going towards are there any outreach programs specifically for getting out of the US spectrum, especially for helping projects like ours? I want to give you an example of what we do. We're building communities from scratch, where we essentially just build cities and plan for all the infrastructure throughout. But then the advantage we've realized at this point we're living in is that we can also create virtual communities alongside, which is essentially metaverses, but also it also opens up the opportunity for most of these features that are provided on the Helium network to interact in both the virtual spaces and also in real life, which is more or less complex from an technical standpoint and execution standpoint on this point of the world. But I want to believe that's where the Helium network is building towards. So are there any direct outreach programs or people we could get in touch, especially like I love the presentation with FreedomFi that really resonated with us, where you're able to ship out the ISP in a box, and that it actually brought out the possibility of us designing these networks first of all in the virtual world using the known parameters that are available to us for us to be able to order custom systems specifically for execution in the real world, essentially. So those are some of the ideas which are bouncing through me right now. So yeah, just coming back to the question, is there any kind of support for projects like ours?
Yeah, I love this question. Scott, go ahead.
I'll definitely jump in here from the foundation. I would say, let's connect. We do have a grants program that, again, it's mostly focused on open source contributions, publicly available programs. Whereas where we can kind of like help bootstrap around kind of like infrastructure, community, especially at a local level. So some of these we've got a little bit more of a rubric on how we can evaluate and support, and some we're looking for opportunistic ways the foundation can help drive anything that's kind of serving on the mission of connectivity for all. We want to figure out how we can be behind that and support it. So if you want, I think my DMs are open. Otherwise, let me just double check. Yeah, I believe they are. So you should be able just to send me a message, and then we can figure out some time to connect. I can also connect you with Clarissa, who is our grant program manager.
Awesome, Scott. Awesome. That sounds amazing. I just followed you right now, and I'll be following through with a DM. Thanks.
Excellent. Look forward to connecting more.
Amazing. So yes, looking forward to you two connecting. I think that will be fruitful. Do we have another requester? We got a couple of minutes left. Let's try to squeeze one more in here.
Yep, just added Ari here, who had requested to speak.
Excellent. Ari, go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Looks like it's working. Okay,
Yes.
so I guess my question is around the use of CBRS in the U.S. So with the example that you gave earlier regarding, Boost Mobile jumping onto a local FreedomFi hotspot, would that take place over CBRS spectrum?
Yes, that is going to take place over CBRS spectrum. That is correct. I want to clarify one point also that in the mobile DAO, we are focusing more on the use case versus like a particular frequency band or a protocol. And the use case here is cellular mobile data offload, which first and foremost, we are focusing on CBRS, but this does not preclude the architecture or the kind of economics of the DAO from introducing small cells that would use other frequency bands down the line, or even using things like the Wi-Fi access points for, doing mobile data offload. But at this point, first and foremost, the focus has been specifically CBRS.
Oh, I guess Ari dropped off of speaker there. Yeah, this is sort of like bleeding edge HIP 51 iteration, but I guess just maybe we could expand on that briefly before we wrap up here. The original proposal was suggesting one sub-DAO per protocol. So like a 5G sub-DAO, 5G/cellular, right? A Wi-Fi sub-DAO, CDN sub-DAO, VPN sub-DAO. But I think now the thinking is switching a little more into use case, right? Because Wi-Fi could be multiple sort of business models that are kind of incompatible. You can use Wi-Fi to beam, right, a really direct signal far away to provide, what do you call it? Like a WISP, wireless internet service provider type service. But you could also use Wi-Fi to offload cellular data carriers. And those are two very different use cases. And the Wi-Fi that offloads cellular data carriers actually belongs in the economic bucket and the utility, like sort of technological bucket with cellular data offload through small cells, not in the bucket with wireless internet service providers. I don't know if you had anything to add there, Boris. Did I say that?
No, I mean, I think I think you articulated it perfectly.
Okay, great. Awesome. Great. Well, I think, and so respecting everyone's time, I think it's a good time to wrap up. Scott, did you have something to add quickly?
Nope, I just want to make sure, Arman, first, thank you to you for taking the time to moderate and help drive a conversation as always. To Boris, to Moby, to Karam, thank you, all three of you, for your perspectives, sharing more about your projects and where you're excited about leveraging Helium from the incentive, technology, the overall community, where we are, really, again, kind of marching for this message of not just the mission of connectivity for all, but also, again, all the services that are going to support everything around like open access for Web3. For folks who want to continue the discussion, please feel free to jump into the Helium Discord. A lot of the conversation is happening in the HIP 51 channel. Moderators are able to support, as well as folks who have been contributing to the proposal are in there. We will have information posted in both Discord and Twitter about next week's AMA to dive a little bit more deeply into questions around technical economic model for HIP 51, 52, and 53. But otherwise, really appreciate everybody joining up today. I think this was an excellent conversation and super excited about what's coming down the pipe for Helium.
Yep, absolutely. And on that note, like, lest we forget, it is Light Hotspots Day. Like,
Yes, don't
in
forget.
lieu of, like, if I wasn't hosting this right now, I'd be like watching the ETL, and, like, looking at every block, watching, seeing how the Light Hotspots launch is going. So super eager to dive into that. For anyone who enjoyed this format, and if audio is your thing, and you're sort of new to Helium, or you're looking to go a little deeper, I host a podcast called The Hotspot. You can find that on YouTube and on every podcast platform. Although I don't think it's on Pandora, but maybe I'm like excluding them for no reason. But yes, search The Hotspot podcast. It's all about Helium. We have, I think, 24 episodes now, purely educational content on the latest cutting edge stuff in Helium. And I'm thinking maybe if people have more of an appetite for sort of Q&A and discussion, since it is also Light Hotspot Day, I may host another space later tonight. So follow me if you're interested in that. I think it could be really fun to sort of recap how the Light Hotspots launch is going with the community.
Definitely. Thank you, Arman. And thank you, everybody else. Appreciate you joining from wherever you are in the world. And keep in touch, get involved. There's a lot more to build and contribute to here. So super exciting.
Yep.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Arman, Scott, team, community. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.